This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources parents, families, and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This podcast is brought to you by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We're so glad to have you. We are joined by one of the wonderful counselors here at Mayfield Counseling Centers, Cassie Carrington.
Well, dare I say one of the founding counselors
Yes.
of Mayfield Counseling.
Yeah.
She's been in
Original.
since the original.
The OGs.
The
Yes,
OGs.
yes.
Nice.
Yes, my name's Cassie Carrigan, and I am an LPC here at Mayfield Counseling. And I, again, got to be here since the beginning, so it's just been crazy to see how much we've grown, and I can't believe I've been doing this that long. But I got into counseling. I used to be a high school teacher, which I loved, and I coached for a while. But, really my favorite times with my kids were when I was one-on-one with them, getting to talk about life. And then, and I had a psychology minor in my undergrad too. So I've always been interested in psychology. So when the time came, I was like, you know what, I'm going back to school. I'm going to get my master's in counseling. And so I've been doing this now for probably 5-6 years.
Oh, it's just funny to think about. Well, first of all, for our listeners in Texas, you are an Aggie, right?
Yes,
So
I am. Whoop.
That's a good thing. It's funny I'm just thinking about when we first met. I was your intern supervisor
Yeah.
at a small like nonprofit counseling. I mean, in Mayfield, it wasn't even a thought.
No. Yeah.
That's crazy. That was like 7 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah. So we have done this journey together and you have helped.
long.
Yes. And here I am. Yeah. So
Feels long, feels short.
yes.
Both?
Yes.
Yes.
All the above.
Yeah.
Well, and we're super grateful for you coming on today. I think that, today's subject is going to be something that's definitely a bit heavier than other topics for sure. And diving into some of your story in the past couple of years. And so I'm really grateful for you sharing this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I also want to put out to our listeners that because today might be a heavier topic, you may want to have discretion about where you're listening to it or who's listening with you.
Yeah. Kids, maybe not so much right now, unless you want to have the conversation, because it's a good conversation, I think.
Absolutely.
To have with your kids, but age appropriate.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Cassie, I just know because we've done life with you for the last couple of years. These last couple of years have been an interesting journey for you and your family. And, out of it is born some passion to talk about kind of what that has looked like. So I don't know, I just kind of want to open that up to, however you want to start the conversation around that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just kind of start with sharing our story, our family story, and our children's story. I had my first child when I was 32 years old. Her name is Adley. She is 4. She is just full of joy. Mm-hmm. And then when I was 33, really almost 34, I had my son Riker. And he is super chill, go with the flow. And then probably I think it was in May of 2018, I got pregnant again. Well, my first 2 pregnancies were healthy, normal, fine, no issues at all. And then I got pregnant with our 3rd child, I think that May of 2018, and everything was fine. Once I hit 14 weeks, I started bleeding. And, for the next 7 weeks, I never really stopped bleeding. They always told me that, this can be normal, like some women, this will happen, they'll make it full term. Every time they looked at her, it was a girl, she looked fine. And so I think in my head, I thought, if she's fine, it will be fine kind of thing. I don't think I realized what was actually like happening to my body. And, I basically had like a wound on my placenta. They don't know why. It just happens. Mm-hmm. Well, it just never stopped bleeding. And so a risk of that is premature labor because blood is an irritant. And so I just went into labor. My water broke at 21 weeks. And so we went to the hospital. They confirmed that my water broke. And at that point, there's nothing they can do. They can't try to hold off labor because my water has already broken. They we actually were going to wait to find out the gender. So they told us in that moment that it was a girl and that we just had to wait until she was delivered. So I delivered her and she lived for about an hour and a half. And, 21 weeks, they don't really consider, viable, at least here on Earth, until like 23, 24 weeks. Okay. So they didn't do anything. They didn't try to save her life, or mainly because her lungs were just not ready. That was the issue, really, was her lungs just not being mature enough and she couldn't breathe. But it was of course, it was a crazy experience because they told us she would live for like 2 to 3 minutes and she lived for over an hour.
Yeah.
And so, we just spent time with her. We held her, and yeah, it's a surreal moment to hold your child like that as they die. And her name is Radiance. It's a pretty powerful story why we named her that, after actually one of our nurses that she's like delivered all of our children. And we think she's an angel. Clearly her name too. And so we just asked her if we could do that. And she, of course, was just
That's awesome.
Honored by that. Really special. So that was September, like end of September 2018. All the doctors, said this was kind of a fluke, and you can have more babies if you want. So probably like 2 or 3 months later, we got pregnant again with our son. His name is Caleb. And I, had a fairly good pregnancy, at least for the first half. Kind of got past that 14-week point where I was just fearful of like, oh my gosh, what if I start bleeding again? All of this. And none of that happened. And we went in for like a 18-week ultrasound. And of course, I was going to like a high-risk doctor because of what had happened before.
Sure. Yeah.
And they said, first of all, that he had like a single artery, which, in your umbilical cord, you're supposed to have 2 arteries and 1 vein. And I only had 1 artery and 1 vein. And they were like, this is fairly common. It usually doesn't turn into anything, but we'll just monitor it. And at that appointment, they also said they think he might have some type of heart defect. So they sent us to a pediatric cardiologist who, was trying to look at the heart through like my womb, which is, a teeny tiny little heart. And he said he thought it looked pretty good. And he was like, we won't really know until he's here because a lot of stuff changes within the heart once we're born. But he didn't seem worried. And he said, let's say he does have this. And they were concerned he might have like a coarctation, which is a narrowing in the aorta. So that big, vein, artery, whatever it is, that goes, around the top of the heart.
Sure.
And he said, if worst case scenario, he has it, you do have to have surgery, but it's super fixable. It's just one-time fix, normal life. They just go in and they open that up. So we're like, okay. And then probably about 8 weeks after that, we went back into another appointment. I just thought it was a normal like ultrasound growth check. So my husband was not with me. Here I am by myself. And this doctor who I hadn't seen before, she came in and she like literally had like a list of like 7 things she thought was wrong with this baby.
It'd have been nice to prep you.
Yes.
Before that, instead of ambush you there.
Yeah. And, she said, we still think he might have this heart defect. She said that he had, it's called duodenal atresia, which is basically like a blockage in the GI tract she saw. She said that his kidneys were dilated. She said he was growth restricted. He had short femurs. And for sure, he has Down syndrome.
And she said for sure.
Yes. Okay. She said 99.9% sure. That's what she said. And so, of course, I am just like shocked and like, wait a second, you know. And we had already had a genetics test done solely because our insurance pays for it. And everything had come back normal. And so I was like, well, I'm pretty sure they already checked for that, Down syndrome, and it said no. And they were like, well, we could get a false negative. So they did a more accurate, I guess, genetic test. And again, it's just off of my blood. They just look for a few more things. And so that came all back negative as well. So we were like, of course, thankful for that.
Right.
At that point, they sent us up to Denver to do just more appointments, more specialized appointments. We had a fetal MRI up there. And then we met with another high-risk doctor up there. When we were up there, the fetal MRI came back. Everything looked fine, they said. They were like, he doesn't have this duodenal atresia. And the doctor that we saw did an ultrasound up there, and he said the same thing. He was like, he's not growth restricted. His femurs aren't short. And this was a 6-day difference between that first appointment and this appointment in Denver.
That's a roller coaster.
Yes.
Major.
Yes. And like the 6 days before, they said he was 6th percentile for like his growth. And then like at this other appointment, they said he was 35th percentile. So, they were like, the only thing they saw was he might have, they call it like a thick pyloric muscle. And your pyloric muscle is where, your small intestine connects to your stomach. Okay. And so they saw like a thickness right there. And so they said, he might have this thing called pyloric stenosis, which is kind of like a partial blockage right there. And they said, if he does, we'll check it when he's here. And if he does, again, they just go on laparoscopically, they open it up, one-time fix, normal life. So, of course, we were thrilled, and, we, for those 6 days, we had been, praying and asking our community to pray. And so there was a part of us, that felt like God had done something, like we didn't know if he had healed them or if maybe he just brought us to the right doctor to show us that these things weren't true, right? Sure. Like who knows what, but like we thought something was happening. And so from there, everything kind of stayed the same. My amniotic fluid started to increase like over time. And I ended up getting so much, way above the normal. Beyond normal. And so I was extremely uncomfortable. And so at 30, and they also thought that for sure he had this like pyloric partial blockage in that pyloric muscle, because that can be a reason why you have such high fluid, because the baby is not processing all the fluid. Passing through. So they induced me at 36 weeks because there was just a fear of if I just naturally go into labor and my water breaks, there's like a high risk for the cord to prolapse. There's all these things. Your placenta abrupt, it could just be really dangerous. So, of course, at this point, I was like, I do not care. You just get that baby here. I want that baby, and I want this baby to be healthy. So we attempted to have a natural birth, but probably about halfway into labor, my placenta abrupted. So I ended up having an emergency C-section, which that in and of itself was traumatic.
Yeah.
And I've never had a C-section before. So all you people out there who've had C-sections, y'all are amazing. Yeah. I feel like all my friends who have had C-sections have lied to me this whole time about, it's not that bad.
You haven't talked to my wife because it was bad.
Yeah. It's just, and I, personally, I don't think they act like it's just a small procedure, and it's actually this really massive procedure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's major surgery.
It's major surgery. Yeah. So I was completely out. So I was not awake when my son was born, which we were trying not to have that not happen, but it just ended up happening. And I remember waking up, and of course my husband wasn't there because he was with Caleb, and the doctor was in there, and I was like, is everything okay? And they were like, oh yeah, he's doing great. So I probably saw him a little bit that night, because I had a C-section. They have, all these regulations. Right. But honestly, he did really good for probably the first 12 hours of his life. And then the next day, so he was born Friday afternoon. And then the next morning, we got up. Jeff, my husband, left to go get our kids to meet Caleb bring him up to the hospital. And my nurse was like, hey, let's have you go down there first just so you can get some time with him. And so we go down there and we turn into his room, and there was like 8 people in his room, doctors, nurses. And so like I immediately knew like this is not normal. Something is wrong. And they had a doctor from Denver like on telemedicine, and they basically were doing an ultrasound on his heart, and they were confirming the fact that he did have this heart defect, this coarctation. And so of course I'm like devastated. And they said that they had to transfer him up immediately to Denver at that point because we had him in Colorado Springs. So they said we need to transfer him to Denver. That's where they do all the heart surgeries. And because I had had a C-section, they wouldn't let me go.
Ugh.
Yeah. So, you know, we sent our son up there by himself because my husband wanted to stay with me. And so the next morning, we just left as soon as they would let us out. And we went up to the hospital. We were at Rocky Mountain Pediatric Hospital first in Denver. And, you know, the reason why, I guess, they were suspicious that he might have this heart defect is because about 12 hours into his life, his oxygen saturation levels started to drop, which would say, you know, he's not able to pump the blood through this like narrowing in his heart. And so like the bottom half of his body had less oxygen than the top half.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So when we got up to Denver, they started doing testing on his digestive system, like his GI tract, to figure out, does he have some type of blockage? You know, and I was not able to feed him. They had him like, you know, just getting his nutrition through an IV. And because they wanted to make sure that he didn't have some type of defect before we started doing that. So they did like a contrast study, you know, they just put dye in him, and the dye went in and it just filled his entire stomach and went nowhere. And so it was obvious, like he did have this blockage. And so probably when he was 4 days old, he had a surgery, and they went in laparoscopically, and the doctor, I mean, these doctors and surgeons are incredible.
Yeah.
Like, I do not know. And, you know, he was 4 pounds and 3 ounces, Caleb.
And they were doing surgery.
Tiny.
That's crazy.
Wow. So tiny.
Yeah.
And he goes in laparoscopically and like does all of this.
Yeah.
And so he basically pulled up some of his intestine to connect it to the stomach to make a new like opening. And when he went in there, his intestines were also malrotated. So he like fixed that. So, you know, and at this point too, they had done some genetic testing on his own blood now that he was here.
Sure.
Everything had come back normal. Again, they tested for more things, and everything came back normal. So, of course, we were very grateful. And probably about 8 days after his surgery, you know, they told us that, you know, if your intestines get touched, that they kind of shut down, they go to sleep for a while. So it takes them a while to wake up. And so we were just waiting for him basically to poop.
Yeah.
And nothing was happening. Probably like day 8 after his surgery, one of our nurses just thought, oh, well, we'll just check to see, you know, down there if anything is blocking it or whatever. Well, she realized that he like only went in like 1 millimeter up his anus. And so he had another blockage.
Yeah. Ugh.
And so it's called an imperforated anus that no one caught because it looked like it looked like everything was fine.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, that was just devastating because now we're having to have another surgery and it pushed back heart surgery. Like we already had heart surgery on the schedule.
Yeah.
So they go in and they fix that. They brought his intestines up to like the surface kind of near his stomach, and they just pulled them out and they gave him like an ostomy bag. And then their plan was to go in like 5 months from then and fix that, but he wanted him to grow so he doesn't have to stretch the intestines as much. So now we have this, you know, this second surgery. And honestly, he recovered really well after the first surgery. Of course, they have him on a ventilator during surgery, but he came off of it really quickly. He was doing well.
Yeah.
He was only on like push oxygen. That's what they call it, where it's just in his nose and they're just pushing some in to help him. But he didn't even really need any oxygen. So after the second surgery, they took him off the ventilator. It seemed like he was ready, and he just did really bad. So they had to re-intubate him probably a day after they took him off. And at that point, he gained this condition. It's called pulmonary hypertension, which is a thing with the lungs, basically. And everybody was baffled because they were like, his heart defect should not cause pulmonary hypertension, right? Because the heart and the lungs are, they're different, but they're kind of one system.
Together, yeah.
Yep. And so everybody was confused. They were like, why does he have pulmonary hypertension, right? And so now we're trying to treat this like it can be a very dangerous lung issue.
Yeah.
At that point, we decided to transfer him to Denver Children's because they have a specific team at Denver Children's that is just a team for pulmonary hypertension, which was a huge decision because he was so sensitive. I mean, you would just change his diaper or you would touch him, his oxygen levels would drop. So to transfer him, thankfully it was only like a 30-minute drive, but it was and to start over with his care, like a new team of doctors to try to catch these people up. But we just felt like it was the right thing to do. So we did that. And once they found kind of that third defect, the doctors at the other hospital were like, we really think you should do this fourth genetic test. It's called a whole exome test. It looks at every gene in your entire body. It hasn't been around for forever, maybe like 15 years.
Which is crazy that we can
do that.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. And we were like my husband and I were just angry because we were like, we didn't even know there was another genetic test. We thought we had done all this and like everything is normal, people. And you just keep saying these awful things about my child.
Right.
So there was this level of frustration. And we're living hospital life. I mean, it was just crazy. But we did it. And thankfully. And when we left the hospital, the doctor there expedited the test because normally this takes like 6 to 8 weeks to get back because it is so extensive.
Right.
Sure.
The other ones only take like a week. And so praise God that she did because fast forward to now we're at Denver Children's. They threw everything at him when we got there and he was in the NICU. I mean, it was an intense 24 hours of them trying to just give him every type of medication. Like he just was so sick. His oxygen levels were bad. So at some point they talked to us about ECMO, which is it's like an abbreviation. I can't remember
It's a heart?
exact. Yes.
It's a heart.
Yeah, it's a heart-lung bypass machine, basically.
Right.
But it's like the most extreme form of life support.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, they were like, we're going to transfer him down to the SICU, which is the cardiac intensive care unit. He's going to end up there anyways because it's heart surgery, and this is where they do ECMO. So they're like, let's just take him down there now in case we get to this point where we have to put him on ECMO. Well, as we were like going down from the 4th floor to the 3rd floor, he like crashed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so awful. Everybody's running. I mean, it was like a movie.
Yeah.
And they run him in and they get him on ECMO. And normally they don't even, I've heard they won't even put babies who aren't 5 pounds, any under 5 pounds on ECMO.
Yeah.
And so they got him on it. And basically they have like 2 cannulas into his carotid artery that takes the blood out of his body, runs it through this machine that oxygenates his blood, and then puts it back in his body. So it allows his heart and lungs basically to have a break.
Yeah, it's like take a deep breath.
Yes.
So to speak, yeah.
And they thought he might have pulmonary hypertension because of infection. Well, all of the cultures had come back negative. So they didn't know what the infection was or, but they were like, hopefully this will give us time, get him better. We'll get him off of this. Then we do heart surgery, all of that. Well, the next probably 5 days he just was not getting better. He couldn't keep his blood pressure up. He had started having a lot of kidney issues. And so, he was just kind of a mystery to even everyone at this hospital. Like, why is this happening? So it was a Tuesday. We left to go to dinner and we came back and the doctors were like, we need to talk to you guys, which of course, I've been doing this at this point probably for like 25 days. I'm like, this is not good.
Yeah.
And he said, we got Caleb's genetic report back. And I said, it's not good, is it? And he said, no. And so he told us that he had this condition. It's a lung disease, basically, or a super rare lung disease. It's called alveolar capillary dysplasia with misalignment of pulmonary veins. So it's quite the
mouthful.
Yes, but basically, he, his capillaries should connect with pulmonary veins to transfer oxygen through the blood.
Right.
And his were displaced and misaligned. So he literally was not able to oxygenate his own blood. And it's at a cellular level, so there is no cure, at least at this point. It is 100% fatal. And so they told us that. Of course, in the moment, I was so confused. And, I've done a lot of research since then. Yeah. But in the moment, I was
like, wait, what?
Yeah. And thankfully, two of my friends were actually in town from Texas, had come in, and they were in the room with us when they told us, which was a gift. They told us that they would not change any of his medications. They wouldn't touch the life support machine so that we could have time to say goodbye. My parents and my husband's parents had been taking care of our two kids here in the Springs. So we called them. They all came up the next day. So, we're incredibly grateful that this doctor had expedited this test. Yeah. Otherwise, we might not have been able to say goodbye to him, and our family might not have been able to. Yeah. For sure, that's the worst day of my life, you know. And having to watch my 4-year-old and 2-year-old say goodbye to their brother. It's something you just can't put into words. Yeah. And, my parents, Jeff's parents, I had some friends come up that day as well. Not many people got to meet him. I mean, everybody, including us, thought we would bring him home eventually.
Right.
So the people who did meet him are really special. Mm-hmm. And he died that day. I think he lived, that was 27 days. And, it was a crazy day. I mean, for obvious reasons, but my kids had already said goodbye. My parents, Jeff's parents, they were already all on their way back to the Springs. So it was just going to be Jeff and I, and we walked back there with a few more friends who had come into town that day. And when we got back there, his blood pressure had dropped significantly. And of course, my friends didn't know this, but I knew every single number on the screen. I had just, I knew exactly. I saw the nurses. All of the nurses were in his room at one time, which again does not happen unless something is wrong. Right. And his blood pressure was 25 over 18. It was nothing. Wow. Yeah. And I remember my friends just thinking, y'all have to get out. I know something's wrong. And then at that point, the doctor came in and said, we just can't sustain these numbers anymore. So they left. And, we turned off the life support machine. And I think this is the grace of God. I did not even think about that in the moment. And I think because he was dying, even on life support. But, that decision, right? How do you take your child off of life support? Right. Even if they can't live, So I have realized since that moment that that's what we did. And then he probably lived for, again, probably an hour and a half after we took him off life support. And so we were able to just hold him. And I hadn't been able to hold him probably at that point in 12, 15 days just because of all the stuff he had. So, and then that was, he was born August 9th. He died September 4th. And then September 27th comes along and we're celebrating our daughter Radiance's birthday with our kids. So it was 11 months time span of just holding two of my children in my arms as they die, you know? So it has been a lot, and, you know, something like that does something to your soul, your heart, your mind that you can't even explain.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Cassie, thank you for sharing. And,
Yeah.
I mean, very sorry for what has transpired over the last year and a half. But I know you're also very passionate about talking about it too.
Yeah.
And I think that, would you say that it's kind of what's keeping you going forward is talking about it and in spurts,
Yeah.
not all the time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, definitely. I want people to know him. I want people to remember him. I want people to say his name.
Yep.
And I just keep begging God of just not to waste his life or our family's suffering. And so by talking about him is a way to hopefully have his life have impact.
Yeah. Well, next week we're going to talk more about this process of grief.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for you laying the foundation of the story, because I think, I'm sitting here and deeply impacted by this story, and I'm just thinking about how no one's exempt from grief.
Yeah.
I think we did an episode on grief a while ago, and I think I said the same thing, that nobody's exempt. And here you are, a therapist, somebody who works with trauma, with just life stuff, experiencing something that breaks you to your core. And I can't imagine that all your training makes it any easier.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I wish.
Yeah, no, right.
I walk people through grief all the time. I walk people through trauma. And, I know all of the things, but it is hard when I am so emotionally invested in this, my story, my children, to remind myself of how this works or what to do, or, it jades everything that I know to be true, right? And can do in my brain. And so, definitely not exempt from grief. I mean, this is the greatest struggle of my life and the greatest fight of my life, and I'm experiencing in a way that I've never had before.
Yeah. I think, for our listeners, give us a little bit of a snapshot of how people have come alongside you. And I don't want to pull out the bad or the good, but like for those of our listeners that are going through grief themselves, or have somebody that they know that is going through something like this, what did you need in those moments? What did you receive that was really good, and what was kind of the stuff don't do that, shut up, don't do that? Is there some advice you can give those that are either going through it, how to ask for what they need, and then those that are having a friend that are going through something similar, that how do we support them?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have gotten a lot of things.
I'm sure.
Good and bad.
Yep.
Which I think is to be expected. Yeah. I don't think our society deals with grief well.
No. Oh, no.
I think in other parts of the world, it's dealt with a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
I think here don't talk about it, just push through, move on. People give us 2 to 3 months and they expect that we're fine now.
Aren't you better yet?
Yeah. And I'm like, no. My child died. Yeah. I think people just showing up really has been a huge thing. Asking about how we're doing, being willing to talk about Caleb, say his name. Those things mean so much to us. And just as an encouragement, I mean, there is nothing anyone can do to fix this.
No.
There's nothing anyone can say to fix this.
No,
so I am not looking to a friend, to someone to say the right thing so that I feel better.
Right.
So even to take pressure off of yourself, you don't have to say this right thing, because there is no right thing. No one can fix this.
Nope.
But to say nothing is worse.
Yes.
And just to, not acknowledge it. Because when I look in the mirror still, all I see is my pain. That's all I see when I see myself.
Yeah.
And then I go into a space and no one even asks about it or even not ask, say, I'm so sorry this happened, right? Like to not acknowledge it. Then I feel like I'm not seen, I'm not known, I'm being ignored because that's all I am right now.
Yeah.
It feels like. And so I think that is, just people acknowledging it, recognizing it, and knowing that like we're not looking to them to fix it because they can't. Like,
well, I think a lot of times we find in grief that the person that says something or doesn't say something, it's about their own comfortability, and trying to placate themselves, or to fix themselves, not the other person. So I'm hearing you say is like just bring it up, even if it's awkward, even if it's stumbling, talk about it.
Yeah,
be present.
Be present.
Yeah, and like it's like, oh, people are like, well, we didn't, you seemed like you were doing okay, and we didn't want to bring it up to remind you. And I'm like, it is always on my mind.
Gosh,
it is a consuming thing, this thing of grief, right?
You're not going to be like, oh, I remember.
Yeah. So that's never, you don't ever have to worry about that because people walking through a significant loss like this, it's always on their mind.
Well, tell me if this statement is true. I've always told people that are going through something, because I've worked with a lot of families that have had kids die by suicide. And I'm like, the grief is never going to go away.
Right.
Like, and the intensity of the grief will probably never go away. It just becomes more familiar.
Right.
And so it's not as scary over time. But I hate that. I hate the phrase, time heals all wounds. Like, that's a bunch of BS. So, no, it doesn't.
Yes.
It
will not.
It just becomes more familiar. Is that a fair statement, or how would you restate that?
No, I definitely think it is. We're, 5-6 months out, and it's still constant. Yeah. And it will never go away. Nope. Like, I will, for the rest of my life, know how old Caleb should be. Like, I will always think about like the loss of my kids and them getting to have their brother, and he should be going to college. He should be going to, high school. Right. He should be getting married. He should whatever it could be, right? Will forever always be there. Yeah. So I don't think the grief and the loss and the pain of this loss will never go away for us. I'm hoping that it changes at some point where I feel a little better. And I know it will, but
And next week we're going to talk about a little bit more about this grief process. And I don't want to leave us on a cliffhanger of this very intense moment, but also just know that we're sitting in a studio and the next episode will be recorded a few minutes later. So highly encourage you to come back next week and listen to this, because I think that this has great meaning, not just to people who are going through grief, because again, no one's exempt. There are people around you that are affected by your grief, and carrying a piece of that and may not know how to handle that piece. And so join us next week. We'll be back.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We are so glad that you are here today, and we hope that if something came up for you that piqued your interest or that you have more questions about, you feel the freedom to call Mayfield Counseling Centers. We're not just here for people in Colorado Springs. We want to help everybody we can. So if you have any questions, email us at candid@mayfieldcounseling.com, or you can check out our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page, where we post resources on a pretty consistent basis. We'd love to help you in whatever we can. Feel free to reach out.